It's now time to bring you a feature on the show today as we look at the state of the Nigerian economy. Now, one of the highlights of this week so far was the report from the World Bank, which stated that Nigeria is among a list of top 10 countries with high debt risk exposure. Now, it stated this in the financial statement for the International Development Association, which was among the World Bank Fiscal Year 2021 audited financial statements. The financial statement stated that IDA faces two types of credit risk, that's country credit risk and counterparty credit risk. Nigeria was rated on the list with about $11.7 billion IDA debt stock, while India led the list with $22 billion IDA debt stock, followed by Bangladesh, as well as Pakistan and Vietnam with $14.1 billion IDA stock. Other countries on the list include Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, and Uganda. But in a swift reaction, the Debt Management Office insists that the World Bank's report was an assessment of the performance of IDA and not the performance of the IDA loans nor the debt repayment capacity of the beneficiaries of the debt loans. Now, by way of explanation, the World Bank, through the IDA, also gives concessional loans to poor and developing countries to help them achieve improvement in growth, job creation, poverty reduction, governance, the environment, climate adaptation and resilience, human capital, infrastructure, and debt transparency. Joining me now via Skype to discuss this and much more, I have Olumide on the partner, Tax and Regulatory Services, Deloitte. Good to have you on the breakfast show, Olumide.
Good morning, David, and thanks for having me.
Now, let's start with an analysis of the nation's debt risk metrics. This remains a sensitive topic. Now, there's a viewpoint of international organizations like the IMF and World Bank, and there's also government stance, which is a little bit defensive for some analysts on the nation's debt threshold. Now, the size of our budgets, deficits, and revenue generation mechanisms still remain almost the same, administration after administration. How does this affect our debt levels, repayment strategies, and also GDP growth?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think it's good to reflect a little bit on the World Bank report. Now, you know, the World Bank grants loan through the IDA and also through the IBRD. The IDA is meant for world's poorest countries, and the IBRD are for moderate income and some specific world poorest countries. So at the time Nigeria was out of that zone, Nigeria was out of the ones classified as world's poorest, but Nigeria reverted back there when things deteriorated around 1989. Now, the debt stock in question, we have a commitment of about 19.5 billion, out of which we've drawn 11.5. Now, the challenge is this. If you look at the indices only, you would say that there is really no cause for alarm. If you look at debt per capita, for example, which is, you know, if you divide Nigeria's total debt by its population, we have about $87 billion in debt, both local and international debt. If you divide that by a population of 200 million people, or 206, you come to around $400, which, you know, per capita, you know, which is really fairly decent compared to other countries around us. Ghana is around, you know, 700. South Africa is about 2,600 debt per capita. United States about $60,000. United Kingdom is about $127,000. So if you just look at that as a parameter alone, you would say, look, the debt stock is fine. Nigeria is doing well. If you also look at the debt by GDP, you see Nigeria also measures fine. So the question is, where exactly are we getting this wrong, and what should we be concerned about? For example, our debt to GDP ratio is 35% or thereabouts, which is really very decent compared to other countries around us. You know, Ghana is about 78 or thereabouts, and Kenya maybe around 66. Even the United States around 102, you know, and UK maybe around 97 or 98. So if you look at it, you can almost argue South Africa, by the way, is just about 80% or thereabout. So debt to GDP in Nigeria is also doing well. But the challenge with that is the fact that this is not for a mono economy like ours. This is not a good parameter to use to judge as to whether or not we are doing well with debt. Rather, we should be looking at things like debt to revenue. This year is projected Nigeria will spend between 90 and 98% of the revenue just to service debt. Now, that gives a different picture from debt to capital or debt to GDP ratio. If you're spending 90 to 98% of our revenue to service debt, then we have an issue. The other bit is tax to GDP. All these other countries that we're saying we're probably better off in terms of debt per capita or debt to GDP, tax to GDP ratio of about 6%. 6%. Kenya, it's about 18%. Ghana is about 18%. South Africa is about 29%. United States, 27%. OECD, 34%. United Kingdom, 33%. Therein lies the problem we have. We are not generating enough revenue, tax revenue, to service our debt. And that should be the concern of every Nigerian.
Now, Mr. Iso, I like the fact that you made mention of our debt to GDP ratio and also looking at our revenue generation capacity as well. Nigeria generated about 1 trillion naira in the first half of this year, consisting of about 512.25 billion naira in the second quarter and then 495.39 billion naira in the first quarter of this year. And like you rightly mentioned, taxation remains key, but with the size of our GDP amid issues such as insecurity, the slow gradual economic recovery as we've been hit by COVID-19 like other economies, can we still get more from taxes to fund development agenda rather than borrowings? And also looking at government spending on debt servicing, 1.02 billion naira so far for the first quarter of this year. We look at the composition domestic debt, 612, and then we have about 410 billion naira on servicing external debt. Do you think really that with taxation amid current economic issues as we speak now, from insecurity to the poor economic stance, the trading of the naira and much more, we can still tax a little more or expand the net?
Yeah, so the answer lies in the latter. We need to expand the net. Nigeria operates in a very large informal economy. Bring those operations into the formal economy and you will be able to tax them. We need to broaden our tax base, and we need to focus more on indirect taxes. Luxury good taxes. That is, and I mean, I've seen attempts in the past, around this, trying to tax luxury goods more. You need to legislate. You need to make it work. You need to, bring those informal economy into the formal economy. You need to focus more on broadening the tax base, not necessarily increasing the tax burden of already compliant citizens, compliant companies. So, we should look beyond formal or corporate income taxes. But we should look more at indirect taxes, and particularly those aspects, of luxury goods that are not being taxed at the moment. We should look at the, indirect tax base and see a way we can widen that. So that's the area where we can do more, because we mustn't put in place legislation that will further punish the poor amidst us, which are the vulnerable people, which we should be protecting in the first instance. So our tax system must be progressive, must be fair. But at the same time, must be able to address our economic concerns, must be able to enable us service our debts. Look, borrowing fund is not a challenge. The question, David, is what do you use the funds for? It's a good thing to borrow funds to fix infrastructures. It's even a better stuff to borrow funds to invest in self-liquidating infrastructures. If you're borrowing billions of dollars to fix railways, please ensure that the railway is able to liquidate those debts. As in the revenues you get from the railway is able to liquidate those debts. Those are beautiful things to borrow funds for. Even companies borrow for capital expenditure, they borrow for investments. But they know that the investment returns will more than outweigh whatever the cost of borrowing is. The challenge is when you borrow to fund, recurrent expenditures, then you have a challenge. You must not be borrowing to pay salaries. Because when you start to borrow to pay salaries, there's no way you're going to be able to pay back that debt. So we need to ask ourselves the question, what are we borrowing for? What are we utilizing those funds for? And I think that is the area government needs to focus on. I know there are efforts at doing project-tied loans, PPPs and the rest of them, but we need to do more. And we need to be more deliberate about our borrowings.
And being deliberate about our borrowings, let's just bring into perspective the Buhari administration, which has barely about 2 years more to go to wrap up. Now, as of 2015, we had the national's total debt at about 12.12 trillion naira. But as we speak, as at the first quarter of this year, we had it increased to 33.1 trillion naira. Talking about looking at measuring what sort of index we used to measure in terms of what we use our borrowings for, and then the level of infrastructure development and all of that. Do you think we still understand the need to develop frameworks to be able to assess all of this investment in infrastructure and a whole lot more? Because at the end of the day, we keep on borrowing and it does not necessarily translate to what the man or woman on the streets can see visibly.
In theory, I think we as a country are on the right path. You know, the recent borrowings have all been targeted at projects, whether it's, you know, AKK pipelines, or it's, you know, Lagos Ibadan, or Abuja Kaduna, you know, rail lines. We are borrowing to fund infrastructure, right? I suppose what we need to do more is the framework around this, the economics around these borrowings. If I wanted to borrow money to construct, you know, a rail line between Lagos and the East, I need to do the modeling. I need to factor in exchange rate differences. I need to ensure that at the end of the project life, I'm fully able to recover the investment, which includes the borrowed fund, plus an element of profit. And when I said deliberate, that is what I meant more, you know, and let there be more transparency around it. Let ordinary citizens like you and I be able to look at the economics of those projects and say, look, these projects are worth the borrowing. I mean, I was discussing with someone 2 days ago, and he told me, oh, I went to Ibadan, I went with the train, and it was a fantastic ride. No, that is good. But what I was saying within myself is, am I sure the price you paid was the best? Was it rightly priced? Was it priced in such a manner that at the end of the project life cycle, whether it's 20 or 30 years, that the cost of constructing the project, including borrow funds, will be fully recovered?
Well, those are some of the issues that we'll continue to have to pay close attention to. Thank you very much for your time on The Breakfast Show this morning. Olumide Eson is the partner, Tax and Regulatory Services with Deloitte. Thank you once again for your time on The Breakfast Show.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.